24 years. That was the price of absolute power. Saddam Hussein ruled Iraq for more than 2 decades with loud promises of strength, unity, and prosperity. Why did the nation follow him? It seemed like a path to greatness, but the hope was a lie. At first glance, a strong leader, but in reality, a jailer. He gave the people fear, war, and endless bloodshed. The footage shows military convoys dominating the streets while civilians look away. It got worse. Entire families did not just vanish, they were purged. Secret police arrived at night, the sound of a heavy knock on the door. Then, empty houses. Millions lived in suffocating silence. Yet the world finally witnessed his collapse. It ended with one of the most shocking and controversial executions in modern history. A grainy cell phone video, a sudden drop. The story ended there. April 28, 1937. On this date, in the dusty village of Al-Auja, a dictator was born. Saddam Hussein entered the world with nothing. His father disappeared before the boy could walk. He grew up in a mud brick house near Tikrit, raised by a harsh mother and an uncle who despised weakness. Poverty was everywhere. But young Saddam did not just survive the streets. He carried an iron rod for protection and learned to strike first. He realized early that in Iraq, power was the only shield against the world. By the late 1950s, the country was burning. Baghdad was a chaos of coups and assassinations. Governments fell overnight. For an ambitious young man, this instability was a ladder. In 1957, Saddam joined the Ba'ath Party. The party preached socialism and Arab unity. Why did a street fighter care about political theory? It wasn't about ideology. It was about structure. At first glance, he was a dedicated revolutionary, but in reality, he was a predator seeking a hunting ground. 1968 changed everything. The Ba'athists seized control of Iraq in a bloodless coup. Saddam stood right behind the new leader, his cousin Ahmed Hassan al-Bakr. He took the title of vice president. But while al-Bakr waved to crowds, Saddam worked in the shadows. He built the Mukhabarat, the secret police. A vast network of spies infiltrated every school, army unit, and neighborhood. The footage shows men in plain clothes watching from street corners, notebooks in hand. Loyalty became the only law. Disobedience meant a knock on the door at midnight. By 1979, the cousin became a liability. Saddam forced al-Bakr to resign, citing health reasons. The transition was instant. Saddam became president, commander-in-chief, and the absolute state. But this was only the beginning. 6 days after taking power, he convened a televised conference. Hundreds of top officials sat in the hall, expecting a speech. Saddam sat on the stage. He lit a huge cigar. He looked out at the audience, calm and detached. Then, he picked up a list. The camera records. The new president slowly reads names into the microphone. Panic rippled through the room. As each name was called, guards grabbed the official from his seat. Men were dragged out of the aisles, kicking and screaming. The remaining ministers began to weep. They chanted Saddam's name, desperate to prove their loyalty. It did not help. 66 men were removed. Outside the hall, firing squads waited. The survivors inside sat frozen, too terrified to breathe. Saddam smoked his cigar and watched them tremble. In a single afternoon, he had erased all opposition. The republic died in that hall. The dictatorship began. September 22nd, 1980. The order was given, and the tanks rolled forward. Saddam launched a full-scale invasion of Iran. This was not a quick campaign. It became a meat grinder that lasted 8 years. Trenches filled with mud and blood. Entire cities were reduced to concrete skeletons. Millions were killed or wounded. The footage shows soldiers in gas masks stumbling through gray fog. Saddam did not hesitate to escalate. He unleashed chemical weapons, mustard gas, nerve agents. He used them against Iranian troops. He even turned them on his own Kurdish population. The town of Halabja fell silent. The world watched the carnage. Why did the West stay silent? It seemed irrational to support a butcher. But geopolitics is cold. Western nations feared the spread of the 1979 Islamic Revolution more than they feared Saddam. They chose the lesser of two evils. The United States provided satellite coordinates. France and the Soviet Union shipped crates of ammunition and heavy weaponry. The war ended in 1988. There was no winner, only a landscape of craters. At first glance, a pointless draw, but in reality, a grand victory in Saddam's mind. He celebrated as if he had conquered the globe. Parades marched through Baghdad, but his appetite only grew. August 1990, Iraqi T-72 tanks crossed the southern border. They crushed Kuwait in hours. Saddam declared it Iraq's 19th province. He looted the banks and burned the oil fields. But this was a fatal miscalculation. The international reaction was instant. The United States mobilized a coalition of 35 nations. January 1991. Operation Desert Storm began. Night vision recordings show green flashes of anti-aircraft fire over Baghdad. 6 weeks of relentless bombing followed. Then came the ground assault. Saddam's forces were obliterated. The highway of death became a graveyard of twisted metal and burning vehicles. Tens of thousands of Iraqi soldiers surrendered or died in the sand. The army was broken, but the dictator survived. Rebellions erupted in the north and south. The people thought their time had come. They were wrong. Saddam sent attack helicopters. Gunships strafed villages. Republican guard tanks rolled over civilians. He cemented his rule with fresh graves. By the late 90s, the battlefield changed. It became an economic siege. United Nations sanctions tightened the noose around the country. In the frame, skeletal children in overcrowded hospital wards. Food vanished. Medicine became contraband. A generation starved. Yet, the lifestyle of the dictator remained untouched. While his people scavenged for bread, Saddam lived in marble palaces. He sat on golden furniture. He walked through private zoos filled with exotic tigers. Portraits of his face hung on every corner, watching the misery. His grip remained iron, but the foundation was rotting. September 11, 2001. On that day, the geopolitical map shifted instantly. The United States government, directed by President George W. Bush, initiated a global manhunt. The objective was clear: neutralize regimes that could potentially arm terrorists. Saddam Hussein's Iraq immediately became a primary target. Why focus on Baghdad? Intelligence agencies found no direct link between Saddam and the attacks on New York. But the fear of what might happen next drove the decision. Washington insisted the risk was unacceptable. The accusation was specific. Iraq was hiding weapons of mass destruction. Reports described a secret arsenal, nuclear components, biological agents like anthrax, chemical stockpiles of sarin gas. Saddam denied the charges. He stated clearly that all prohibited weapons had been destroyed after the Gulf War, but his past actions made him impossible to trust. He had invaded two neighbors. He had used chemical weapons on civilians. He had blocked inspectors for years. His word meant nothing. The United Nations sent teams led by Hans Blix to verify the claims. They searched factories. They opened bunkers. They found nothing. But the United States and Britain remained unconvinced. They argued that the dictator was simply better at hiding the evidence. Tensions escalated. In early 2003, the ultimatum was delivered: leave the country or face total war. Saddam refused to move. Diplomacy ended there. March 20th, 2003, the bombing of Baghdad began. The campaign was named Operation Iraqi Freedom. It opened with a massive aerial assault. The footage shows night skies turning orange from explosions. Tracers from anti-aircraft fire cut through the smoke. The sound of sirens is constant. American and British armored columns pushed across the border. They moved fast. Major cities fell in rapid succession. Basra was taken, Karbala followed, then Najaf. The Iraqi defense lines disintegrated. At first glance, Saddam's Republican Guard was an elite fighting force. But in reality, they were obsolete and outgunned. They tried to resist, but American technology overwhelmed them. By April 9, 2003, the capital was breached. U.S. tanks rolled through the streets of Baghdad. The regime did not just fall, it evaporated. In Firdos Square, the cameras recorded the symbolic end of the era. A U.S. recovery vehicle attached a heavy chain to the neck of Saddam's massive bronze statue. The metal strained. The structure tipped and crashed onto the concrete. The crowd surged forward. Locals struck the statue's face with their shoes. Chaos took over the city. Government buildings were set on fire. Looters stripped the presidential palaces of furniture and gold fixtures. Every portrait of the leader was torn down, smashed, or defaced. The man who had ruled with absolute terror was gone. But he had not been captured. Uncertainty haunted the nation. No one knew where he was hiding. 25 million people lived in the shadow of one ghost. That uncertainty haunted the entire nation. Over the next few months, U.S. forces launched a massive dragnet to find him. They called it Operation Red Dawn, a name inspired by an old American war movie. Soldiers swept through hundreds of locations. They kicked down doors in farmhouses and cleared isolated desert hideouts. Every raid was based on intelligence extracted from captured aides and former loyalists. Saddam kept moving. He stayed in safe houses provided by a dwindling list of supporters. He shaved his signature beard. He wore simple clothes to blend in with the rural population. He traveled only at night to avoid the drones overhead. The footage shows American convoys moving under the green glow of night vision. The U.S. military also dismantled his inner circle. Dozens of top officials from the regime were captured. Soldiers identified them using the famous deck of cards. 55 playing cards featuring the faces of the most wanted members of Saddam's government. Why did the network crumble? Money bought some information, but fear of the Americans was stronger than old oaths. The biggest blow came when his sons, Uday and Qusay, were tracked down in Mosul. July 22, 2003. American forces surrounded the villa where they were hiding. At first glance, a standard cordon operation. But in reality, a siege to the death. A fierce gun battle broke out instantly. It lasted nearly 4 hours. The sound of Tau missiles hitting the structure echoed through the city. Smoke poured from the shattered windows. When the firing stopped, the soldiers entered the ruins. Both brothers were dead. Events accelerated. With his sons gone, Saddam was completely alone. His once loyal army had dissolved into the desert. His government was destroyed. His closest aides were either in body bags or in prison cells. Still, he managed to stay hidden for months. He lived like a fugitive in the same country he once ruled with absolute power. The hunt for Saddam became one of the largest manhunts in modern history. The clock was ticking. December 13, 2003. On this date, the manhunt finally hit a dead end. That night, soldiers from the 4th Infantry Division and the elite Task Force 121 mobilized. They launched a precision raid near the town of Ad-Daur. This was just 15 kilometers south of Tikrit, the dictator's birthplace. The area was a fortress of loyalty. It was filled with relatives, former bodyguards, and tribal supporters. They had kept him invisible for months. Why did this raid succeed where others failed? American forces had swept this grid many times. They always found nothing. But a captured bodyguard finally broke under interrogation. He gave up the specific coordinates. Operation Red Dawn began in total darkness. U.S. troops encircled 2 farmhouses identified as potential safe zones. Helicopters loomed overhead. Humvees blocked the dirt roads. Infrared cameras scanned the perimeter for any heat signatures. Escape was impossible. Soldiers kicked down doors. They cleared every room. They checked every storage shed. Hours passed with no result. Then, a soldier spotted an anomaly behind a hut. At first glance, a pile of garbage. But in reality, a camouflage technique. It was a small patch of earth covered with bricks and weeds. The soldiers cleared the debris. They found a styrofoam plug concealing a hole. It led to an underground space barely large enough for one person. The beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness. Inside the cramped pit, 6 feet down, they found Saddam Hussein. The footage shows a disheveled old man blinking in the light. His hair is long and matted. A thick, unkempt beard covers his face. He wears simple, dirty clothes. He looked nothing like the powerful tyrant who once dominated television screens across Iraq. A loaded pistol and 2 AK-47 rifles lay within his reach. He had the means to fight, but he did not fire a single shot. Instead, he raised his hands. He surrendered without resistance. He was clearly exhausted. The soldiers noted he was nervous but cooperative. Identification protocols started immediately. Specialists took DNA samples. They examined old scars. They compared dental records against regime files. There was no mistake. Within hours, the identity was confirmed. A helicopter extracted the prisoner to a secure location for interrogation. The announcement came the next day. U.S. Administrator Paul Bremer stood before the press. He spoke 3 famous words: "We got him." The news spread globally in seconds. In Baghdad, the reaction was explosive. People flooded the streets. The sound of celebratory gunfire rang out across the city. For them, decades of terror had ended. But in the loyalist strongholds, there was only shock. Supporters watched the screens in disbelief. They could not process the image of their leader being dragged from a hole in the ground like a rat. But this was only the beginning of his final chapter. The trial awaited. June 2004. This date marked the beginning of the final chapter. After months of secret interrogations, the coalition officially transferred Saddam Hussein to the custody of the Iraqi interim government. But this was a legal formality, not a physical release. Why did American soldiers continue to guard him? It seemed the Iraqis were in charge, but the threat level remained critical. Insurgents plotted liberation attempts outside the walls. Rivals plotted assassinations inside them. The U.S. military kept him in a high-security facility because the new government could not guarantee his survival until the trial. On July 1, 2004, the prisoner arrived at his first hearing. The location was a secret bunker within the green zone. Cameras recorded the moment he walked in. The footage shows a man in a cheap gray jacket clutching a worn copy of the Quran. He looked aged. His beard was trimmed, but his eyes were heavy. He scanned the room, trying to project the old authority. But the fear factor was gone. The judge read the list of charges: crimes against humanity, mass murder, torture. The prosecution focused on a single brutal event, the Dujail massacre of 1982. Decades earlier, gunmen in the Shia town had fired at the dictator's convoy. The retaliation was total. Saddam did not just arrest the attackers, he erased the town. Bulldozers leveled orchards, gunmen dragged families from their homes. 148 men and boys faced summary execution. Their land was seized, their houses became rubble. The documentation for this crime was complete, making it the perfect starting point for the prosecution. The trial officially opened in October 2005. The venue was a fortress. Concrete blast walls surrounded the building to stop car bombs. Snipers watched the rooftops. But these measures failed to protect the participants outside the zone. The danger was immediate. 3 defense lawyers were shot dead in the streets. Another was kidnapped. The pressure broke the leadership. Chief Judge Rizgar Mohammed Amin resigned. He could not guarantee safety for his staff or himself. At first glance, a judicial process, but in reality, a war zone. But the chaos inside the courtroom matched the violence outside. Saddam treated the tribunal as a stage. He pointed fingers. He shouted over the witnesses. He declared the court a tool of foreign occupation. In the frame, the defendant striking the railing with his hand. He tried to rally his supporters through the television screens. Yet, the paper trail was undeniable. Prosecutors presented documents with his signature in blue ink. Video archives played on monitors. Survivors from Dujail took the stand. They spoke of electric shocks and missing brothers. The courtroom fell silent as they described the screams from the torture chambers. Throughout the process, the prisoner returned to a solitary cell. U.S. guards watched him 24 hours a day. Only his legal team and limited family had access. Global news networks broadcast every session. It became the most watched legal event in history. Then came the end. November 5th, 2006. The proceedings had lasted over a year. The verdict took minutes to read. The camera zooms in on his face. The judge announced the decision, guilty. The sentence, death by hanging. The room erupted. Saddam yelled curses at the bench. He called for victory against the invaders. But the gavel had fallen. There was no escape. The era of the Iron Fist was officially over. December 30th, 2006. This date was meant to be a celebration. It was the first morning of Eid al-Adha, a sacred time for Muslims worldwide, a day of faith and sacrifice. But in Baghdad, the sacrifice was literal. Why was this specific day chosen for the execution? It seemed like a bureaucratic decision, but the timing sent a shockwave through the region. For the Sunni community, it felt like a calculated insult on a holy morning. For the Shia victims of the regime, it was final justice. The country was already bleeding from sectarian violence. This decision poured gasoline on the fire. Saddam spent his final hours at Camp Cropper, a fortress of concrete and steel near Baghdad International Airport. He was not just a prisoner, he was a ghost in a cage. Isolation was total. The American guards followed a rigid protocol. No conversations, no abuse, just eyes watching every move, every breath. At first glance, a defeated old man. But in reality, a dictator maintaining his performance until the end. He requested only one thing, his Quran. He held the book tight. Witnesses say he didn't sleep. He sat on his cot. He read verses. He prayed. He waited. 2:30 in the morning. The cell door opened. American soldiers stepped in. The time had come. They did not shout. They simply acted. They pulled his hands behind his back. The sound of plastic cuffs ratcheting tight cut through the silence. A black coat was draped over his shoulders to ward off the winter chill. A guard offered a black hood, a way to hide the fear. Saddam shook his head. He refused. He wanted to see the end. He wanted the world to see his eyes, but this was only the beginning. The American mission ended here. The soldiers stepped back. They handed the prisoner over to Iraqi officials. From this moment, his fate was local. An armored convoy tore through the sleeping city. The streets of Baghdad were dark, empty. The destination was a secret facility in the Khatimiyya district. The building carried a grim history. It was the former headquarters of military intelligence. The irony was absolute. This was a slaughterhouse where Saddam's own regime had tortured thousands. Now, the torturer was the guest. The execution chamber was cramped, cold. The walls were bare concrete. In the center stood a wooden platform constructed for a single purpose. Above it, a steel hook. A thick hemp rope hung motionless. The air smelled of dust and old fear. Only a select group was permitted to enter. Government officials, security officers, a doctor, a cleric, and the witnesses. Some were there to represent the victims. Their eyes were fixed on the tyrant. A few cameras were positioned to record the event. The footage shows shadows dancing on the walls as men crowd into the small space. Voices are raised. 6 in the morning. The sun had not yet risen. Guards led Saddam toward the stairs. The room was thick with tension. Insults were shouted from the crowd. Voices chanted the names of his enemies, but the dictator did not flinch. He walked steadily. He climbed the steps without help. He stood on the trap door. The executioner adjusted the noose. The rough rope tightened against his neck. The metal clasp clicked into place. The room fell into a heavy silence. There was no turning back. The executioner pulled the lever. A loud metallic clang echoed off the concrete walls. The trapdoor swung open. Gravity took over. The body dropped sharply. The fall was instant. The neck snapped. Minutes later, the doctor stepped forward. He checked the pulse. 0. The story cut off here. 6 in the morning. The news hit the streets of Baghdad. Radio stations interrupted their broadcasts. Television channels flashed urgent red banners. The message was simple: the dictator was dead. But was this the dignified end the government promised? It seemed so on state TV, but a different reality emerged hours later. A low-resolution file appeared online. It was recorded secretly on a mobile phone by a witness hiding in the execution chamber. The footage captures what the official cameras cut out. In the frame, Saddam stands on the high metal platform. He is surrounded by guards. At first glance, a judicial procedure, but in reality, a chaotic lynching. Witnesses begin to shout. They chant sectarian slogans at the condemned man. Their voices are harsh and mocking, filling the small room with noise. The video shows Saddam responding. He appears angry, but his voice is steady. The tension peaks. Then the camera shakes violently. The loud clang of the trapdoor opening is audible. The body drops. The screen goes dark. There was no containing the leak. The file crossed borders instantly. News networks broadcast the grainy clip on loop. Millions of viewers clicked play. Not just Iraqis. People from every continent witnessed the raw footage. For many, it was the first time a modern dictator's execution was seen in such brutal detail. For some, this was justice served, but others recoiled. The footage shows guards taunting a dying man. It looked less like a legal act and more like tribal revenge. The Iraqi government faced a storm of criticism. Foreign leaders demanded answers. Why was the execution carried out during the holy festival of Eid al-Adha? Why was there no order? Inside Iraq, the reaction was fractured. Some celebrated the end of a dark era. Others saw a deliberate insult to the Sunni population. The hanging did not heal the nation. It fueled the hatred between communities. The chapter closed in blood. 24 hours. That was all it took to move the body from the gallows to the earth. An American helicopter transported the remains to Tikrit. The handover was quick and cold. Clan members received the corpse and drove it to Al-Uja, the village where the dictator was born. The footage shows a plain coffin draped in an Iraqi flag being lowered into the ground. There was no state funeral. Yet, the grave immediately became a shrine. Supporters flocked to the site, treating the burial ground as holy soil. But this was only the beginning. The execution was meant to close a dark chapter. Instead, it set the entire book on fire. The violence did not stop. It accelerated. Sunnis and Shias turned on each other with newfound ferocity. The streets of Baghdad transformed into kill zones. The smell of cordite hung permanently in the air. The sound of car bombs became the city's daily alarm clock. Assassinations were no longer covert operations. They were public executions. By 2007, the death toll spiraled out of control. 3,000 civilians were dying every month. The removal of the tyrant had not brought peace. It had torn the scab off old wounds. At first glance, a liberated country, but in reality, a failed state. The centralized dictatorship collapsed, replaced by the anarchy of militias. Gangs set up illegal checkpoints. They checked IDs. A wrong name meant a bullet in the head. Even within Saddam's own tribe, loyalty fractured. Revenge attacks decimated the family. Cousins were hunted down. Half-brothers who once ruled alongside the president were either hanged or forced to flee into exile. The new Iraqi government tried to establish control. It failed. Corruption swallowed the budget. Foreign interference paralyzed decision-making. Electricity failed. Water ran dry. By 2010, the country was still drowning. Entire cities fell under siege. Insurgents regrouped in the shadows. Al-Qaeda in Iraq began to mutate. It laid the foundation for an even more terrifying force: ISIS. Events accelerated rapidly. In 2014, the black flag rose. ISIS captured large swathes of territory. They took Mosul in a matter of days. The camera records, Iraqi army uniforms abandoned in piles on the road as soldiers fled. A new caliphate was declared. But who led this new terror? The answer shocked the West. It was Saddam's own men. Many of the group's top commanders were former officers from the Ba'athist army. These were men who had lost their pensions, their status, and their pride after the regime fell. They knew how to organize, they knew how to fight, and they knew how to kill. The irony was brutal. The country that once feared one man now faced thousands of fanatics. Millions of civilians were displaced. Refugees clogged the borders. Historic cities crumbled under mortar fire. Ancient monuments were smashed with sledgehammers. The chaos became so absolute that the United States military had to return. Airstrikes resumed, troops deployed. They tried to undo the catastrophe that followed the toppling of the statue. For the average Iraqi, hope was a distant memory. The dream of democracy had vanished, only the war remained.